Story 1: Henry Ford was a mixed bag. On one hand, he did revolutionize manufacturing, and when automobile sales outperformed expectations, he wanted to lower prices and raise salaries. This decision led to a conflict with his board, which eventually took the matter to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court decided that the shareholders were more important than the customers and workforce. On the other hand, he was a eugenicist and supportive of fascist movements in Europe. Story 2: Jerry the Mouse from Tom and Jerry. Tom is a household cat, and it's his job to hunt Jerry. While Tom might engage in some crazy antics on his own, he's literally just following the order of his owner. Exterminate the vermin, or you will get kicked out of the house. Not to mention, sometimes Jerry is the one who starts the fight. He steals food from the refrigerator, knowing that it might make Tom responsible for his selfish actions, and he sometimes taunts Tom when he's not bothering him even. As a child, we root for Jerry for being the underdog, but now as an adult, I can wholeheartedly say that I despise Jerry from the bottom of my heart. Story 3: Thomas Edison. Many of his patents were based on stolen ideas and inventions, but Edison was simply the first at the patent office. After Nikola Tesla invented alternating electric current, which would provide great technological progress, Edison funded a campaign against it during which he was electrocuting dogs to death as proof of the deadly nature of Tesla's invention. Story 4: Jackson, the guy on the $20 bill, said he was doing something good for the Native Americans but did something evil instead. He lied about it, causing generations of damage. Jackson. Story 5: Augustus had thousands of wealthy Romans slaughtered to take their wealth. He made his closest family members miserable with forced marriages and divorces. He exiled his only child, and later her daughter as well. And, of course, he launched campaigns of mass murder and enslavement against foreign tribes, but that was part of the job description, I guess. Story 6: Kurt Cobain. He and Courtney Love both allegedly used heroin and cocaine while Courtney was pregnant with Francis. Francis was rumored to be born addicted to heroin. He made several unsettling voicemails to Victoria Clark, threatening to hire a hitman and harm her. He choked Courtney during an argument about Kurt's guns. Among other actions, he wasn't that great of a person, regardless of his appearance. Story 7: J. Edgar Hoover. He started the Federal Bureau of Investigation and used it mainly to spy on the country's leaders for blackmail purposes. He essentially invented the modern-day deep state. Story 8: Peter Venkman Walter Peck was absolutely within his rights to be wary of people running around with nuclear accelerators on their back and housing a containment unit with no oversight. He was disagreeable, but he was right. Story 9: Charles Lindbergh, first transatlantic flight, impressive, but also supported the Nazis. If you mean historical figures traditionally supported in our narratives or who were popular at the time but who do not align with our modern sensibilities or whose policies ended up leading to horrific long-term ramifications. Yes. Story 10. Here is the thing. People who do great things often seem to do awful things as well. Those great things do not nullify their atrocities. However, their acts of evil also do not cause their great achievements to be disregarded either. They just exist as people who did both, just like the rest of us, to differing degrees. Fritz Haber is the best example. Without him, we would not be able to feed most of the world. He also invented the compound the Nazis used to exterminate Jews. Humans are complicated creatures. Story 11. Most of the heroes that died in the Alamo were considered unreliable individuals who were running from legal problems or financial ruin. Furthermore, the entire reason Mexico went to war with Texas was that Anglo-American settlers, who moved in, began using the cheap land they bought to cultivate cotton among other crops using slave labor. Mexico passed a ban on slavery in 1829, and 7 years later, they ended up in a war against a renegade region of their country filled with American settlers who refused to even discuss eventually phasing out slavery. All the talk of freedom and democratic rights were a precursor to the South's explanation of why the Civil War happened. Texas was essentially just an invasion of individuals given to excess and opportunists turned slavers who refused to obey the law of the country they emigrated to. Story 12. Charles Lindbergh was a highly controversial figure who was speculated to have been involved in the tragic demise of his own 1-year-old son due to the child's developmental delays. The official narrative depicted the incident as a kidnapping that went awry. However, conducting a search for the Lindbergh baby will reveal numerous reasons for apprehension. Story 13. Not considered by most people, but those who were in Yeltsin's team in the 90s tried to convince Russians that they were heroes. They claimed to have saved Russians from famine and freezing temperatures, provided vital reforms, and navigated through the end of the crisis. In fact, these reforms were prepared before their arrival and implemented very hastily. With the dissolution of the Soviet Union, it put the whole Russian economy in a very difficult position. And then, they didn't do anything to fix it, only begging for loans from the International Monetary Fund and investing in pyramid schemes. Story 14. Gandhi slept with multiple women to test his celibacy, allowed his wife to die rather than using medicine, and then took medicines when he contracted malaria, held racist views towards Jews and Africans, defended Hitler, harbored prejudice against people of lower castes, admitted to pedophilia, and despite his peaceful philosophy, had a surprising interest in nuclear weapons. Story 15. Oliver Cromwell has multiple statues and monuments in England and is hailed as a very capable military commander. He committed multiple massacres of innocent Irish civilians, and it baffles me that he could ever be remembered positively. Story 16. In the United States, I feel like it's only been about 5 or 10 years that people are starting to question the morality of Andrew Jackson, the horrific criminal against humanity who forced the Trail of Tears. I mean, he's on our money. Story 17. Depending on how you look at it, either all of them or none of them. People are complicated, and some things that are now considered evil might have once been considered legitimate. No historical figure is truly pure good or pure evil. Story 18. Reagan, we can draw a direct line to our current challenges to his tax law changes. I would add Nancy in there as well. I wish someone just said no to both of them, and I don't understand the current infatuation with their reign of terror. Story 19. History only tells one side of the story. There is always another side that does not mention the atrocities that occurred to get to the end result. Someone or something always suffers to make way for progress, and progress is usually driven by money, greed, and power. Get out of the way for progress. Story 20. Mother Teresa believed in letting the people in her care suffer and denied them treatment on the pretext that suffering brings one closer to God. She sought treatments when she was ill but denied them to others. That's just one reason she is criticized. Story 21. Alexander the Great was great at slaughtering Persians. Also, there was that time he got so drunk he killed his best friend over a perceived insult at a feast. Story 22. Andrew Jackson adopted a Native American child, then sent thousands of other Native Americans to their deaths on the Trail of Tears. This included wealthy landowners, well-educated communities, and all but those who hid in the Appalachian Mountains. Of course, Trump holds him up as an idol of American history. Story 23. Mother Teresa would observe others suffering and refuse them pain-killing drugs, telling them the pain was them being kissed by Jesus. When she became ill herself, she hopped on a plane to avail herself of the best medical care and pain-killing drugs that money could buy. Apparently, she didn't fancy being kissed by Jesus. She was supposed to be a friend to the poor. She was a friend to poverty, as it made her famous, but no friend of the poor. Story 24. A common example is Christopher Columbus. While often celebrated as a hero for discovering the Americas, his expeditions led to the exploitation, enslavement, and deaths of countless indigenous people, casting a dark shadow on his legacy. Story 25. Margaret Sanger, a eugenicist who started Planned Parenthood with the intention to abort black babies. The organization even distributed an award called the Maggie for decades until the backlash led them to discreetly retire it. I would consider myself pro-choice, but that woman was pretty controversial. Story 26. The easier question is, who in history that is remembered today wouldn't be considered evil in modern day, likely for views that were normal then but abhorrent now? Story 27. Christopher Columbus comes to mind. He is often celebrated for discovering America, but the reality is pretty dark. He was responsible for a lot of brutality and exploitation of indigenous people. Story 28. Recent historical figure, but certainly deserves to be mentioned. I haven't read all the way through the comments, so someone else might have already mentioned his name. Donald J. Trump.